All right, let's just dive right into this. I want you to imagine, just for a second, what would actually happen if you stopped treating your mind like this fragile thing that needs constant comforting, right? What if you started treating it like a machine? A literal engine that's completely capable of overriding its own limits through intentional, calculated suffering. Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to break down the exact functional mechanisms that allow a human being to push way past the impossible.
To do that, we are popping the hood to deconstruct this mental engine. We'll be looking at the mechanism of suffering, the accountability mirror, the 40% rule, the cookie jar method, callousing your mind, and finally, the limits of this mechanism. Let's get to it. Part 1, the mechanism of suffering, overriding the status quo. So, to really understand how this machine works, you kind of have to look at the raw material it was built from. David Goggins definitely didn't start out as a machine. In his early life, he was a traumatized, abused kid dealing with severe learning disabilities. Fast forward a bit, and as a young adult, he was a 300-pound exterminator, pre-diabetic, and honestly just feeling entirely defeated by life. Yet somehow he transformed himself into a record-breaking Navy SEAL, an Army Ranger, and one of the world's top ultra-marathon runners. How? Basically by completely rewiring how his brain processes discomfort. And honestly, this divide is just fascinating. Modern society is, completely obsessed with a quick fix. We love a good life hack or some algorithm that gets us maximum profit with minimum effort. But Goggins argues that while those things might get you some temporary success, they're never going to lead to true self-mastery. His core philosophy is that relentless effort and voluntary suffering are literally the only real mechanisms for true transformation. You just can't hack your way to a hardened mind. Think about it like this. For most of us, pain is an obstacle, right? It's a blaring alarm telling us to stop. But Goggins treats it as a functional tool. He actually believes pain unlocks a secret doorway in the mind that leads to peak performance. When you accept it and endure it, it fundamentally alters your mental state, cracking open that doorway to your optimal capability. So suffering isn't just a byproduct, it's the mechanism that literally powers the engine. All right, part 2, the accountability mirror, facing reality. Let's move to the very first specific gear in this mental engine. Goggins developed this tool back when he was failing out of high school. He had this sudden, harsh realization. Absolutely no one was coming to save him. Not his mom, not his teachers. If he wanted out of his miserable situation, he was going to have to engineer the escape himself.
He calls it the accountability mirror, and the mechanism operates exactly like this. First, you literally look at yourself in the mirror. Then you strip away every single excuse, every little piece of entitlement, and you stop blaming the world for your inaction. You brutally own your current reality, even if you're way out of shape, failing at work, or just struggling. By accepting that raw starting point without sugarcoating it, you can finally demand genuine change.
And this isn't just some abstract feel-good theory. It is a highly practical mechanism. When Goggins was struggling with severe learning disabilities and trying to pass his military exams, his tutor actually joked that he'd have to write things down 1,000 times just to remember them. Well, Goggins took that literally. To memorize the U.S. Navy diving manual, he wrote the entire thing out, start to finish, 14 times. 14! That is the accountability mirror in real, tangible action, identifying a massive deficit and applying relentless mechanical effort to override it.
Which brings us to part 3, the 40% rule, bypassing the governor. See, once you take accountability, you have to actually start pushing. And that introduces the concept of the mind's governor. Just like a car engine has a physical governor to stop it from revving too high and blowing out, our brains have this built-in internal mechanism. It's designed to protect us from pain and fatigue, artificially limiting our physical and mental performance just to keep us safe and comfortable. But here is the massive paradigm shift in how the brain actually functions. Goggins realized that when your brain is screaming at you to stop, when you feel completely, utterly exhausted and you are 100% convinced you can't take another step or read another page, you've actually only tapped into about 40% of your true potential. So the crucial functional takeaway here is this. Pushing past that initial wall of agony isn't just about acting tough. It is the exact mechanism required to unlock that hidden 60% reserve of energy. When you feel like you are totally, absolutely done, you are actually just reaching the baseline of where your true growth begins. Bypassing that governor, that's exactly how you achieve the unimaginable. Part 4, the cookie jar method, fuel for the engine. Now let's be realistic for a second. Bypassing a 40% governor takes a massive amount of fuel. When you are deep in that pain cave, Where do you draw your energy from? Well, this brings us to the next functional tool, the cookie jar method. This whole concept was inspired by a literal cookie jar that his mother kept in their home just to provide tiny moments of happiness and gratitude during an incredibly traumatizing childhood. Goggins took that idea and adapted it into a powerful mental framework. You basically create an inventory of your past victories and even the traumas you've survived. You store them all in a metaphorical cookie jar. Then, when you're facing a seemingly impossible task and you just want to quit, you reach into the jar. You withdraw a memory of a time you beat the odds, and you use that as raw emotional fuel to power the engine forward. You might be wondering, what exactly goes into this jar? Listen, they don't have to be world records. It's a completely customized inventory of your own personal resilience. Maybe you quit smoking, maybe you overcame a bout of depression, lost some weight, or even just supported a friend through a tough crisis. It serves a very specific function. It reminds your brain, logically, hey, I have survived worse. I've done hard things before, so I can definitely survive this. Moving on to part 5, callousing your mind, building mental armor. When you're constantly using the accountability mirror, pushing past that 40% governor, and fueling up from the cookie jar, you're engaging in an overarching process Goggins calls callousing your mind. Think about it. Just as a blue-collar worker builds thick physical calluses on their hands from the constant friction of hard labor, your brain builds a hardened resilience from the friction of intentional discomfort. Now, this brings us to a pretty intense philosophy. Goggins genuinely believes it's perfectly fine to be cruel to yourself as long as you realize you're doing it to become better. Doing things you absolutely hate every single day, it isn't about blind punishment or self-hatred. It's a calculated, deliberate technique to build mental armor. You introduce controlled cruelty, like waking up at 4 a.m. or running in the freezing rain, so that when life inevitably throws uncontrolled cruelty at you, your mind is already fully armored to handle it. And if you want to see the absolute mind-boggling extreme of this mechanism in action, look no further. Goggins decided he was going to break the Guinness World Record for pull-ups. He actually failed twice due to severe physical breakdowns, literally tearing the skin off his hands and destroying his muscles. Most people would quit right there, no question. But on his third attempt, using these exact mechanisms of assessing, learning, and overriding the governor, he shattered the record, 4,030 pull-ups in 17 hours. Just incredible. All right, part 6, limits of the mechanism, running in the red line. We've talked a lot about the incredible power of this mental engine, but we also have to step back and look objectively at the limits of this mechanism. I mean, what happens when you operate an engine at absolute maximum capacity, constantly running in the red line without ever letting off the gas? Well, as you'd expect, it comes with some severe, real-world consequences. As his story gained traction, it understandably drew some significant critiques. People on community forums have pointed out the collateral damage. An obsession with suffering like this severely strains work-life balance and personal relationships. Training for hours on end, starting at 4 a.m. every day, leaves very little room for a partner or a family to operate normally. It's just an objective fact worth noting that Goggins is currently entering his 4th marriage. The mechanism clearly demands a heavy personal toll. Furthermore, the athletic community heavily criticizes his application of this mechanism. His initial foray into ultra running was, well, highly reckless. He ran his first 100-mile race with virtually zero preparation, and it resulted in catastrophic physical damage. We're talking stress fractures and symptoms of kidney failure. While it certainly proves that the mind can drag a broken body across a finish line, experts warn that this dumb brute method of ignoring sports science and proper recovery is highly dangerous for anyone trying to replicate it. So, what's the ultimate takeaway here? Look, Goggins' extreme behaviors and physical destruction aren't necessarily meant to be copied recklessly. You definitely don't need to run 100 miles on broken legs. But what his story undeniably proves is that the mechanics of the human mind are vastly more powerful than we normally give them credit for. His functional tools, the mirror, the jar, the 40% rule, they prove that our capabilities are exponentially larger than the artificial limits our comfort zones suggest. Which leaves us with a final provocative question to think about. Where exactly is your 40% governor set right now? When you tell yourself you've done enough for the day, is it actually true? Or is it just that governor kicking in to keep you nice and comfortable? I want you to think deeply about how you might apply just a small dose of this mechanism in your own life. What are you willing to endure to override that limit and finally unlock your own hidden potential? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you on the next one.